made money. It made considerable money. It was generating revenue for the city, and then all of a sudden, it looks like in 2009, 10, and 11, it went the other way, and then it actually started becoming an expenditure for the city, and has been an expenditure for the city ever since.
Right.
It's somewhat growing or averaging over, let's say, $200,000 a year. So I'm guessing you're adding that $200,000 in an expenditure to Parks and Recs now. It
Right.
used to be a revenue, and then minus the, I guess, average of 100 a year, so that you get 300 in my.
Right. As the
Adding that up,
expenditures increase for the after-school program through salary increases, the revenue generated off of that program we haven't had a change in the rate structure for the after-school program in years. And so as expenditures grew, the revenue side was not growing at the same rate. We had come to council a couple of times and wanted to increase the after-school rates, and at that point in time, council did not approve that. So that's where it started to get where it wasn't breaking even or generating any revenue for the city. But also during that time was when the school district had picked up some of those schools, and because we do have a sliding scale. And at that time, the school district took over those schools, and those were more profitable schools than some of the others because of the sliding scale, and so that's how we're now getting more expenditures and revenue. Dr. Worsley just indicated we did increase several years ago about $4 to try to offset the difference between the revenues and expenditures for that program.
Do you remember that exact year, or
Do you remember?
about ballpark?
Might have been 12, 13. It's been several years ago. We went up about $4.
Well, and that, I think that's an important note for council to understand, and forgive me, maybe we just didn't go in detail from that standing and understanding what all encompasses the community school programs, but I believe, your expenditures are continuing to go up, and you haven't raised the fees other than, I guess we're saying, several years ago.
That's correct.
And actually, Dr. Worsley he's kind of somewhat handicapped by that. Your budget is handicapped by that, not just bringing in the aquatic center, but some of the other needs you've had to cover those costs. So it brings up an important point about, do we, on all our programs where we have not increased fees, to keep up with those expenditures, or else you're getting further in the hole. It's not just this facility, but it's other matters as well. So, that brings up a very important point. Even if it's a slight increase, I think the city is going to have to keep up with its expenditures to the program, to put the program on, to run the program. And I'm not sure about. I'm just guessing that there's some other programs exactly like this as well. So, I would be interested in this recommendation that was made. I would be interested in looking at maybe some increase in fees to try to offset those expenditures over the years, because it looks like it's been, kind of continuing on that graph for a long time.
Well, we can certainly bring that back, and I really concur, Councilor Davis. I've got to say, one thing that we hate to do is raise fees, obviously. We hate to do that, but when we decline to raise fees year after year after year, then we get in a situation as we are with the, garbage trucks, and we get in a situation as we are now with after-school programs. So it's good to, I think, revisit fees and look at the cost of providing that service and decide how much of a taxpayer subsidy we want to have for that particular program. It's we do that regularly with the budget, and we can certainly bring that back. If there's not action taken today on the matter, we can bring it back.
Certainly, I don't know what the pleasure of the rest of my council colleagues, but I would be open to looking at that, or at least carving some out there to contribute to, well, our goal that we're trying to reach.
Okay. All right. I think that we are at a stalemate. So, does anybody have a proposal for going forward? Counselor Allen.
I think everybody needs to bear in mind, this is kind of the first time we've been at this particular point, at least in my tenure down here, or at least in a long time. Having never operated an auditorium before, we're all kind of trying to feel our way through this. I would like to put on the table that we discuss the authority idea, and we give the task force time to digest that. I think the city attorney has forwarded over the information they need to begin the process to come back to us with what they would like, and then we talk to them about the restructuring. I'm hesitant to go into the proposal that the city manager put forth until we can kind of get a better handle on what we want to do. We have time. I think Councilor Baker described the accounting side of this pretty well a while ago, and it made me feel a little more comfortable in what we're going. Where we're going. It is putting some stress on our Parks and Rec. With all due respect, you asked for this, last year, and now you have it, and we need some more.
As they shake their heads and they
did.
They
They
throw their
came
L3 out of
They
whack.
came twice to council, and they said, we want to operate it, and we said no, and they came back again and said, we want to operate it, and there was a problem with the vendor, and so that's all taken care of. That's not my point, but my point is that I think that Parks and Rec can stand to operate it for a couple more weeks maybe, till we can have time to get with the workforce, talk about the hours and the structure, some of the things that we talked about today as far as the concessions and those type things that I mentioned earlier. But I would like to ask, let me just go ahead and make a motion about council approving the authority for the aquatic center and see where we go with that.
Okay, let's see if I can understand what, it's a motion to form an authority, okay, because the information you have is for an advisory committee that I think was sent to Pops, that Clifton did, yeah. And before we go on, I just have to say, because, it's the lawyer in me, but you never let a misstatement lie, and I know it wasn't intended, but James came when he came in here as Parks and Rec Director and inherited the aquatic center, and we asked him to tell us how much it would cost to run, and he told us $1.2 million. He didn't ask to run it. We put it in my budget letter, and I think FY12 or FY13, I can't remember, and set out how much that would be, and council decided not to, which is great, and then they hired U.S. Pools, which we all recognize was a mistake. When U.S. Pools was effectively fired, or the contract was nullified, then James was asked to provide how much it would cost for him to pick it up and run it until an RFP process could be put in place, and he did so. So I do think that there is this mythology that somehow James is just dying to be an auditorium director, or that Becky or any of them are just really want to be around chlorine all the time, and that's just not accurate at all. They're just trying to get through this. If they were going to do it, they would have hired somebody, as in my budget letter, FY 2015, who knew about pools. They've never wanted to be involved or over the auditorium. So just want to make that clear. And as the city manager said multiple times, particularly now that it's taken on this particular tenor and tone about the aquatic center and Parks and Rec and all that, they just prefer from a staff morale standpoint and a council harmony standpoint that they not be involved in running it. So, Councilor Barnes, yes.
Last time, I thought Gary brought up a very good idea about an authority. Subsequent to that, Clifton sent some information which contained, which I think that the swim community. First of all, let me give due credit to Parks and Recs for the job you've done, to Becky and to Holly. But what Clifton sent to me was a very good proposal for an ordinance that was more of the line of an advisory committee, and we sent it forth, Gary and I, to Brian Abeda and some of the individuals. We're in the task force. We think that the swim community itself has a lot of experience, expertise over the years that they've gleaned of something like this here. And we think that it will, my own personal opinion, is that, excuse me, my own personal opinion is that it would be highly advisable for us to glean all the vast years of knowledge that they have in the advisory committee capacity. And I know that it's being passed out now, and I looked at the wording, and I looked to the extent of what would be the compilation of their duties, and I think it would be a perfect fit right now for us to consider something like this here, to draw on their experience, their expertise, to assist and advise this council on the running of the natatorium. And so I would combine with Gary. I think he definitely came up with an excellent idea, and I think it's something that we really need to put in place, particularly if we're talking about having those individuals involved in raising money and in the operation. So I would concur with Gary on implementing something like this here now, because I think it would be highly beneficial for the operation of the natatorium, would take a lot off of our Parks and Recs personnel and keep us abreast of what's going on. And we have something like this in the Golf Authority, in the Trade Center. So I think having an advisory group that would be able to advise council, the mayor and council would be an ideal situation.
Mr. City Attorney, I think that there are two subjects being talked about that are different, and I think you need to clarify the difference between an advisory committee and an authority, because they're different. So
Yeah, this draft creates an advisory authority or board, if you want to call it that. This is strictly advisory only, would work with Parks and Rec and council. Now, you can go further with a full-blown authority, such as a Trade Center Authority, where that authority group actually hires an executive director, who hires and fires employees. They set their own budget. And I don't know if you want to go that far yet with this natatorium or the steering committee that's out there. I mean, if you want to start with this, you can, or we can look at full-blown authority later. But this is just an advisory authority or board right here.
And also, as we continue to discuss this, I just point out that we're talking about structure, which is important, but it still doesn't address money, and regardless of authority or advisory committee or whatever, it sounds like we need to get about the business of bringing forward Company A. And Company A, in order to negotiate that contract, we have to know what ballpark we're in. So we have to know about money, I think, before we leave here today, or we've accomplished some things, we just haven't accomplished the critical step to actually moving forward. So let's see here, we got Councilor Thomas.
I want to make sure that I understand what we are voting on. As I understand Councilor Allen's motion, it was to create an authority, and then we were handed this ordinance. Are we voting on this ordinance?
This ordinance is not an authority. That's what the city attorney was saying.
Well, whatever it is, are we voting on this, or are we voting on what Councilor Allen said?
Councilor Allen, do you want to speak to that? Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. If you recall, when Brian Abeda, representing the task force, presented to us the variety of ideas, we all thanked him, and I think that what he presented was what we were looking for. shortly after that, I made a motion that their next step would be to look at forming an authority, and that we would provide them with information so that they could form an authority to operate the pool. They could hire whoever they wanted to hire and do that, because they know how to do that. They know the swim community better than we do. And in this document, all this was a draft that as I understand it, was a draft that City Attorney's Office sent to Pop and I, Councilor Barnes and I, and we sent it to Brian Abeta to get the ball rolling on their committee structure to begin to discuss this. I'm not proposing this today. To me, this creates basically an advisory authority. It doesn't create a pure authority as we know it, like the Golf Authority or the Trade Center Authority, who operate, they have boards and they operate the business of each entity. And that's what I would envision, this authority operating the business of the natatorium. Setting hours, hiring the marketing director, setting the fees, and if they want to work in conjunction with Parks and Rec, or if the council would like for them, they could work in conjunction with Parks and Rec until they get on their feet, get their legs under them, so to speak, and then they could just operate it on their own. We would have, I guess, an MOU, some type of budgetary oversight. We would appoint the members as this does define in here. But I'm thinking that the task force takes this draft and begins the work of forming an authority for them to operate the pool structure. Now, this does say all the swimming facilities in Columbus. That's what this document says. That may be something they want to do. That may be something that they want to cull out and just operate the natatorium. One individual I spoke with said that it may be good to have all the pools involved in this, because if we have a large event, we could farm out practice time to the pools. We could utilize them in that area. We could have events at the pools that can accommodate that. There's a lot of discussion here that I feel very naive in discussing, because I just don't understand all the swim community facets that come along with that. But I would like for council to give direction and let the task force begin the work of forming an authority to operate under.
Well, one of the things that I would like to have before I make a decision on which way to go on this is either from the city attorney's office some kind of primer, if you will, on how an authority is formed, what it can do, what it can't do, all of those kinds of things. Either something from the city attorney's office that outlines those things, or something from the city attorney's office that tells me where I can go and find out those kinds of things. I think at this point, generally, I probably am in agreement with an authority, but until I know some of those kinds of details, it's hard to make that decision. When I think about, for example, how the Trade Center Authority works, I know most of that piece of it, but I'm not sure that I know. So I'm not sure, Councilor Allen, what we would need to do today beyond saying, let's begin the operation, let's begin doing whatever we need to do to move in that direction. This is, again, something that if we create the authority, it's going to be a dramatic shift from where we are now, from how we do things now with our aquatics program. And I'm not prepared this afternoon to put that into effect until I have some more information, and maybe I'm the only one that needs.
You may want to look at the ordinance, and it's on mini code in chapter 2 of the city code that we can get it to you, but it creates the Trade Center Authority by ordinance. But They have power to set a budget. They have power to contract.
See, that's the kind of
They
thing
hire-
I'd like to
They hire
have.
a director.
That's
Yeah.
the kind of thing I'd like to have, you know, what are their authorities, what can they do, what does that take out of our, you know, some of those kinds of things. So I don't know if that's helpful or hindering.
No, it is. It's right on point, actually. I asked the same question to Clifton, and Esther sent it out to me, and it's a very short paragraph, talks about the Trade Center Authority and the powers and duties that they have. And I think it'd be great to send it out to everybody so we can have
We'll send it to
a
everybody.
chance to look at that. But it's very worded very broadly, but specific enough that you know what the powers and duties are.
Pam, obviously, you've been staying there for some period of time. I presume you have something to say?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to remind council that creating an authority, there's also financial impact to creating an authority. At this time, if you think about the revenue generated is about $200,000, that pays the utilities. So there would be a subsidy required from the general fund of X amount each year to get them started. Are they required to operate as an enterprise fund, which typically an authority would operate as a business, an enterprise fund? So there's some financial implications of creating an authority, what the subsidy would be. And right now, they're part of the general fund. So they're not charged cost allocation, they're not charged workers' comp and risk management because they're included as general fund. As an authority, just like the Trade Center, just like the Gulf Authority, there's non-departmental expenses that would be incurred, so that 1.2 million would be increased by other operating expenses to operate as an authority. So I think that's kind of important to the equation as well.
And I concur with that and would say that, just remember that, you know, if we go this direction, similar to the Trade Center, when there are serious maintenance issues, that's still a city expense. And so if there's something with the pool system that costs $500,000 and they don't have it, they're going to be coming to us. And so we just have to remember that even though it's an authority, and as the mayor says, they typically pay better and do things differently, the bottom line or the ultimate responsibility is still the city.
Yeah.
And also in the authorities, they have staff that manage, they have finance managers, they have accounts payable individuals. At the time that this is presented to be under Parks and Rec, they're absorbing that role. So there would be expenses in addition to the 1.2 million that as an authority, someone would have to handle those types of transactions as well. So that just needs to be considered in the equation.
Okay, Pops, you want to speak to that?
You know, I was all for the authority until I had conversations with Clifton. He told it would cost us more money, and that's where I kind of like backed off. But what I want to ask Clifton to bring this forth is because I've read it, and I spoke to Brian Abeta and other individuals in the swim community. And if we read it, what this does do, what I'm looking for, I'm not so hooked up on the name authority versus advisory. As long as the swim community has more input, more guidance, more involvement, more, because these are the individuals who know what things need to be done. So it just makes sense that they should have more input to be able to advise us how things should be done. Now, all of us here have been getting emails, excuse me, all of us here have been getting emails on certain issues that the swim community feel that need to be addressed. Now, you don't have individuals, and I, like I said, I always commend Parks and Recs, but you don't have individuals involved in an activity for years, bringing their children up in it, without them being able to have been confronted with issues that they were able to solve. And I've been watching all the emails that this needs to be done, that needs to be done. I think these individuals here are a source of some valid information for us that would help the natatorial function better and should have a little bit of teeth in what's going on, because they, I feel, are the ones that know. And so that's what this is about. Now, wish council would look through this here. I have heard from some of the individuals on the task force who like the wording, appreciate this, Clifton, who like the wording because it gives them a feeling of involvement, more involvement than they have at the task force level. And I think rightfully so, that they should. If we really want this to be successful, then we need to have more input from the individuals that know. And so I would wish that council, and you brought up some good points, because I did know all that was involved. When Clifton said it was going to cost more money, it's going to be one thing, I brought that up to the individuals on the task force. Their reply was, no, we don't want to have that. Exactly what this says here. We want more input into the ongoing operation of the natatorium, and to me, it makes sense.
And if you want to go this advisory board route, we can change the word authority to commission, so there's no confusion with a full-blown authority. We can put that in here.
The end thing is to have an organization, just like we have with the
Parks
Golf
and Rec.
Authority and Quarter and all, individuals who know what all is necessary to have a natatorium run the way it should.
Let me ask, we've got several people in queue on various subjects, I'm sure, but one thing I think we have to decide, if not today, by next week, certainly the money. How, you know, as I understand it, we're really bumping up against being able to hire these third-party people and having them anywhere near being able to open the door on July 1. If we don't make a decision almost, what? Yeah, tell us that, Pam. What is the timeline, and when's the drop-dead date for them, for us to be contracted with them, and how long does the contract process take, and so on and so forth? Go through
Their request is 60 days mobilization, which would bump back from July 1st to May 1st, which means the contract would need to be approved by council and routed for signatures and negotiated based on the dollars that are available. And at this point in time, it would be a 45-hour per week contract. If we can get that initiated the next meeting or the following meeting to be ready to go May 1 so that they're here July 1st ready to operate.
Okay, so how long does it take to do all that? If I hear what you say, everything has to be in order by May 1 for them to take the keys by July 1. So how long does it take? Let's see, it's May 15th, so we roughly have 6 weeks.
Right.
So how long does it take to negotiate and blah, 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 to have everything in place by May 1?
Well, our preference would be to have it approved at next council meeting, which would be March 22nd, but no later than the first meeting in April in order to meet that timeline.
Okay, so in order to do that, we will have to bring forward to council Company A at a recommended of the existing budget, and that would necessarily result in a contract negotiation of 45 hours. Now, not to say if all this mana comes in from all these great programs and marketing they're going to do, then of course we could always broaden it. But that is what would be negotiated. Is that my understanding? If when you bring it next week, it will be approved unless there's some other direction or decision made pursuant to the city manager's recommendations, that it will be a contract to go forward and negotiate on the budget that we currently have.
And they're at 45 hours, their proposal is $825,000, and their revenue projections with the 45 hours is $219. So their revenue projections have reduced based on a 45-hour operation.
Okay, all right, because I think that's where we need to understand that we've got to be, or what's going to happen is, and all this is great about authority versus advisory, and I know we'll have good discussions about that, but if we don't have the operations in place, then, and there's a time issue there, and I just want everybody to be aware of it.
And
Okay,
if
let's see.
if additional revenue is generated, then obviously they could increase their hours of operation.
Right.
But the base at this point on the budget that we currently have would be 45 hours. Excuse me?
Yeah, they could not do it unless it comes back through our
Exactly.
process. And you would have to approve it because we will have contracted for a specific amount. And if they expand the hours, then it could increase our expenses. And so that, you'd have to make that decision.
In a moment.
Sorry, Mayor.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've got other people in queue, but go ahead, yeah.
Well, at the same time, if they sign a contract and they're generating revenue and they're making more money,
The
what
revenue
incentive
comes
is
to,
it for them to come back and renegotiate the contract?
the revenue comes to the city. Any revenue generated at the facility comes to the city. They're paid a contract fee to
contract.
operate.
Okay, that's
Any
right.
revenue that's generated is city revenue.
And they get that fee whether they generate revenue or not.
Right, unless we make some stipulation
yeah.
in the contract of a minimum revenue generation expected.
Or increase hours?
I mean, we can
No.
include that.
Well,
You have to put the increased hours in the contract. If you
Well-
sign with them for 45 hours, then you're stuck with 45
exactly,
hours.
yeah.
But you can do, like you said, they can put a stipulation saying,
Well, that's why when we bring you the RFP, you approve them, and then we go negotiate based on directions you give us. And so if you're telling us, here's what we want, within the money, we can go and negotiate that.
Yeah.
but when you say negotiate, you can go to them and say, this is what we have now, but if the funding comes available, we would like more hours, then in the contract should be stipulated that way, shouldn't it?
Well, if we see that revenue is available because it's coming in, and we come to you, we can go to them and say, we want you to add 15 more hours a week, and they tell us what that price is going to be, and then we come forward to you, and we tell you that, business is good, and there's more demand, and 15 hours more a week will cost us this, and then if you want to approve that, you can, and then we go back and sign an agreement to add the additional 15 hours. That's how it works.
I think we can, wait, Counselor Woodson, I just hate, because we've got so many people in line, and I think we're getting off. Let me just say, where we are right now is we have a motion and a second on the floor related to an authority, which is not the document that's been handed out. So that's just there, and it's parked for right now. We've got a ton of discussion, obviously, about a lot of different subjects, which I'm happy to go ahead and do, but I don't want us to forget that we have that motion. We can't entertain another motion until that is resolved or withdrawn. But,
We didn't take a motion.
oh, I thought Counselor Barnes seconded it. No, okay. All right, great. So we have a motion, and having heard no second at this point, then it would fail for a second. The motion was to adopt an authority. Counselor Allen, do you want to state your motion? What was the motion that's on the floor? That you want to move forward with an authority?
I think the motion was for council to work with the advisory committee for them to draft up what they're thinking about an authority. I mean, Councilor Barnes mentioned he's heard that if there's additional funding involved, they don't want that. But the folks that I've talked to would like to at least explore the opportunity for the authority. This is a good document to start with.
That may be more of a referral? Does it sound like more of a referral than a motion, or what?
No, I think when we last spoke with Brian Abeta here, we gave him yes, we implied to him that what we wanted them to do next was to start working on the authority concept. And we've sent all the information to him now, and if we pull back on that, then it kind of makes us look silly. But I was asked to bring this today to get the ball rolling in the authority arena for those in the swim community, and that's the motion.
Okay. So it's a motion for an authority, not an advisory committee, which is the document you have in front of you. And so is that a second, Counselor Davis? To the motion. We don't have a second yet, so there can be no discussion until there's a second. Okay, second it for purposes of discussion. Okay, now, we got plenty of people in line, so we start with Counselor Woodson.
I have a question, Clifton or Gary, I'm not sure. On item F in this document here, I'm sorry, I didn't look that way. I'm sorry. Item F, it says to review the City Department of Parks and Recs policy and procedures at least once per year and make any recommendations for amendment as deemed necessary by the board. And isn't that the road that the Parks and Recreation Advisory does? I don't think that needs to be in here unless we plan on abolishing that commission.
I think the groups could have some overlap, you're right, but this was envisioned as making sure this new authority, commission, whatever we call it, had the ability to have a forum to make recommendations once a year with respect to policies on pool operations, no other areas of Parks and Rec.
I think we can eliminate that one because, let me tell you why, because E says inspect and conduct site visits to the natatorium and each pool operation by the Department of Parks and Rec at least once a year. I think the advisory board can, in conjunction with E, complete that because this makes it sound to somebody who'll read it is that the Parks and Recreation Commission now shouldn't even be in existence then, because it doesn't say anything about pools. It says the Park and Rec policies and procedures. It doesn't say anything about the pools. It's not specific. And in conversation of the motion that's made there, I agree that, you know, we give the implementation that we want them to be an authority, and if I understand the discussion correctly, that's where we want them to be. But based on the dollar amount that we're trying to get now for the natatorium, if we made them an authority, they would think that they need a funding base. I would ask the author to please put it as a commission, and then once we know where the funding is to run the natatorium, then come back and change it from a commission to an authority, because then we'll know where the funding will come to support them. And it's just a recommendation, but letting them know that we're heading towards the authority. The problem is we don't have the fund to give to them when we're trying to raise $500,000 for the natatorium.
The funding is a separate issue from this thing. Let's let them decide whether they want to be an authority or an advisory committee. They may come back and say, we think that this document's fine, but let's hear from them.
Okay, so that's what I think there's a little struggle. That's more of a, hold on a second, because we have got to get some direction here.
I understand that,
Hold on a
Mayor.
second.
No, hold on for a
Okay, I'm
minute.
going to just turn everybody off for a second.
You
We-
always cut me. I want to finish up. I'm doing my conversation.
Okay,
You
hold
cut
on.
me earlier, you cut me now.
What Counselor Allen just said is not a motion to start an authority. It's a motion to refer it to a commission or task force to discuss an authority, Counselor Allen, because we've got discussion going to the motion, and I think we're talking about different things. So I'm just trying to get it clarified. Your motion is a motion to have an auditorium or an aquatic center authority, or to refer it to a commission to discuss an authority?
Let's refer it to commission or discuss authority.
Okay. All right. Counselor Woodson.
Madam, with all due respect, I wish we stopped that sometimes because it really upsets me. We're having the conversation and it's based on this because that's what I'm trying to get clarity on where we're going with this. So with all due respect, please give me a little bit more respect. And that's what I was trying to have the conversation with Gary about, what is actually what we're going to go through with this so that the authority knows. And the authority knows that right now we want them to be authority, but we don't have the funding. So while they're having their discussion, to know that that is the problem with the authority portion of it, is that includes funding and where we're going to get the money from. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. We have Counselor Davis.
Thanks, Mayor. To Counselor Allen's motion, I really appreciate you taking the time and presenting this to us today. I like what I hear, and I'm in agreement with you how to move forward on it. I do know if the city goes down this path, that there's going to have to be some kind of a transition period, and I would foresee Parks and Recs continuing to do what they're doing, although there may be some people that would object to that, but to continue what they're doing, because from a funding standpoint, you can still approve the budget. You got 6 months still before the funds really start getting tight. During that period, you can still work on ways to generate more revenue to again reach the goals. And we don't know what the cost savings could possibly be. I think one of the reasons I like that idea is because I believe that you can control the labor cost a little bit better. I really believe that. I think the mayor is right. Without, unless it's autonomous, we already have a Parks and Recs Advisory Board in place. It would become nothing more. If it's an advisory capacity, it would become nothing more than an association. So, I am open-minded to that and moving down that path, but I think that you'd still have to, there would have to be a transition period here until you really nail it down as to exactly the order how this authority will function. And like we've heard here, there's other examples that are already there, and I would think it's pretty close to it. But we're not, again, we're not talking about a trade center. We're not talking about golf courses. We're talking about a pool, which basically has a roof over it. And we're talking about some other outdoor pools. And I would question and debate how complicated that matter could be compared to some of these other facilities and programs. So I like the idea, Councilor Allen, but and the city manager, if you're still looking at as an option, if we're looking at A as an option, I think it'd give you an excellent opportunity to go back and work on the times of service. I think the task force gave us some hours that we should consider, and who knows, maybe they can work on their labor model a little bit more. I don't even know. I don't know what's their management fee. I mean, what kind of management fee are we talking about here?
Well, of course, it's an RFP.
Well, I'm looking at the numbers you gave us, and there's no. It just says.
And so.
One says with the 56 hours, it says overhead profit, extra chemicals, but the 89 hours, there's no line for a management fee.
Well,
what is the management fee? Is it a percent of revenue or what?
We have an active RFP on the table. And so if you approve proceeding forward with the RFP, then we go into negotiating and doing all of that. And that number is in there somewhere, but I don't know if we reveal.
No, their profit number is built into their proposal of the $1,267,047.
Well, I see in the information I have from 2.8, it does talk about overhead profit in the 56 hours, but I see where they kind of loaded that up, but 89 hours, I don't, other than unless they loaded it up in their labor cost, I don't see in the 1.2 that we're talking about, I don't see a management fee or any overhead.
Yeah, we can go back. I think what we did when we went back to them with 56 hours and the 45 hours is they broke their expenses out differently than they did in their original proposal because the RP requested an 89-hour operation. And so their overhead's built into those numbers that they proposed.
Can you tell me this? Is it a flat fee or is it based on a percentage?
Everywhere.
At this point, the RFP did not require them to split out their management fee or their overhead fee as a separate number.
And it's a flat fee.
So they've just worked it in here somewhere. Well, Councilor Allen, that somewhat supports your point about possibility of saving money.
What would save money?
I'm sorry?
No, I just said that,
Well-
what would save money, but I'm fine, okay.
Well,
Okay.
and I was going to say, obviously, you can share the management fee of USA Pools. What that number was, there was a monthly.
It was $54,570 a month.
So, I mean, we can share that with you, but
But that included their overhead and their profit.
that was USA Pool. I said, I wanted them to just share with you USA Pool's management fee because it's an over and done with agreement.
And it was how
Current-
much?
54,000 and some change.
That was their total operation fee. They didn't break out their fee based on overhead. We paid them $54,000 a month
And
to
that
operate.
included their management fee and everything.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Counselor Thomas.
I want to go back to
Can someone turn on, there we go. Okay, got it.
I'd like to go back to Counselor Allen's motion to explore this and send this to the task force. I would like for them to bring back to us, as when we send this to them, I'd like for them to tell us what they see as the pros and the cons of doing this. And there are pros and cons in everything, and that will help us to weigh how we're going to do that. I also think that one of the reasons that we would want to form an authority is in order to cut some of the costs. We may have to go up on in some other areas, but one of the reasons that we want to do this is to contain this cost. So I'm a little concerned that we have only been talking about the increased cost, and we haven't been talking about, and this ought to maybe pull, it may not do it a lot, but may pull down some of the costs. So as this is transmitted, if this motion passes, as this is transmitted to the task force, I really would like to see what they see both as the pros and the cons of developing an authority, an advisory commission, or whatever we wind up having them recommend to us. And I really would like their recommendation on what they think it should be and what some of those elements are. I personally think that this document that we have before us is a good starting place. There's some cleanup that can be done, instead of deleting item F as has been suggested, perhaps we need to make sure that it says in the area of the operation of the aquatics division or whatever, so that it's not just a free-for-all out there. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. And one question I have as you all are finishing up this discussion, as I understand it, this is going to be referred to that task force that we currently have. So there's not a new task force. Okay, just want to make sure we all understand. And just because I don't want to get an uproar of how could you have misunderstood once the motion is heard or voted on, and then we're going to bring back the contract for Company A next week. Any thought on that? Maybe as we go through discussion, people can mention their ideas on that.
And that will be for the 825,000 and 45-hour operations.
Right, I just want to put that on the table, because if there's any other discussion, I just don't want to leave here today, have staff go back and bring that back to council next week and have a huge uproar about why did you bring this contract back. We just need to know what you want to do about the contract. Councilor Thomas, to follow up.
I do want to say just one little quirk on what you said, City Manager. What I would like for you to bring back to us is the recommendation with the 800. And in the contract negotiations, it may be that Company A says to us, we can do something for 50 hours. I don't want council to put too many restrictions on it to tie the hands of the people who are going to negotiate this contract. They're going to negotiate a contract for $823,000, and they're going to get the best deal we can get. And so if it may be 45 hours, that may be all they can get, but I don't want to, I would like for that not to be part of the motion in case they could get 50 hours. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think that is helpful. Let's see here. We've got Councilor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. I was beginning to wonder if my light worked. Got just a couple of questions. One, it appears to me that this would be improper for us to vote on a dollar amount when we've got our budget session coming up in another couple of months. I think it ought to be brought as part of the budget. We don't know. I mean, there may be some dramatic changes when you deliver your budget to us. And for us to go ahead and issue a contract for next fiscal year seems a little, it just seems like we got the cart before the horse. I would rather see us, I think the message is clear from what I've heard, and we can take a vote or pass an oral resolution to affirm that we want to stay around the 850 price range, that's fine. But I don't, what is magic about initiating this contract in July 1?
Well.
Are they going to pull out if we don't do it July 1?
There are a couple of things that's magic.
Well, give me
Now,
one.
Well, we're not going to have staff working 80 hours a week over there, that's one.
I agree.
And the second is that they need 60 days to put the boots on the ground, and we need to give them the time that they need to plan, to thoughtfully plan out and be prepared to take over the keys with seamless change in operations, other than there'll be different people over there. And if we're going to do that, we need to know a dollar amount, we need to have an agreement, and we need to go and negotiate with them.
Well, I guess my question would be, if we had this brought to us the first meeting in May, that's 60 days, so at worst it would be another 30 days of these folks having to work those extra hours, and we could implement it in August 1. That gives us 60, it would give us 30 to work out the negotiation stuff, and then it would give us another 60 to be able to get the key term. That way it could be part of the budget. It just makes me a little nervous when we're committing to a contract for next fiscal year, and we haven't seen the mayor's proposed budget.
Well, and let me say that certainly we'll do whatever you want, but when I talk to these staff people who are working over there, one of the two, they absolutely felt they couldn't go any longer. And they have a family, is what they told me, and the other said, I'm willing to do it. And so we got them both to say, I'm willing to do it. And I said, okay, well, we're going to have you out of there by July 1.
And I told them last time when they come up here, I don't want them there working those hours. I don't think they should. The challenge I'm having, though, is I see this as a budgetary issue, and I mean, it's 6 votes is my late tormentor Red McDaniel used to say you can do anything. So if we get 6 votes to approve an amount, it's fine with me. I just have an issue with approving a budgetary appropriation when we're 30 days away, 40 days away from the budget process.
Well, it's the same amount.
We can make some representations about the budget. There's no more money there than there was last year, there's less. I mean, that's one
And I
representation.
anticipate that. But if there's less, that kind of highlights my point that if there is any manipulation of any of these funds, it's difficult to go ahead and anchor this in. I've got a couple of other questions too, so I'm not sure that's going anywhere. I don't think any of my council members.
And if I could just say that we've already got the 825 budgeted for 16, it'd be the same amount for 17, and then if, as we've talked about earlier, if you add some money to that, and we want to add 10 or 15 more hours to whatever we settled on, if you add money to it, we can always go back and negotiate increasing the hours. So the 825 is already there, and it's,
Now, and as the mayor stated, I know it is tougher this year, so I just want to make sure that we're not going to shortchange any of the other areas because we've locked in a contract.
if we went less than 825, then we would be further reducing the aquatic center budget. So,
Well, the other, and it's along the same lines, the other question I have is, if we're going to pursue at least the investigation of whether or not we want to hire an authority, is 1 week going to be enough time? If we're going to bring this back and try to vote on it next week, is that enough time for us to do the due diligence on whether or not authority will function properly?
I would think, again, just from what I'm generally hearing, that if we bring back and vote on the contract, that to move forward with the negotiation, which is obviously going to take a couple of weeks, that gives us an opportunity to hear some more. And the authority issue can still be being discussed. It seems like the authority is going to have to be obviously enacted and then selected and then meet and then determine what their raison d'etre is, and they're going to move forward with a plan, with a strategy, let's say. That's going to take some period of time. So it seems like having a contract in place so that there is a management company over there making sure it's running I don't want to speak for some yet-to-be-conceived authority, but would work fine with them as they get up as a fledgling organization.
Well, the only reason I ask is I know when they were discussing an authority, they were talking about the possibility of having an authority that acted much the way the one in Mobile did. Well, I think Mobile had their stakeholder, and it was their primary stakeholder. It was actually a swim club that ran that natatorium, and what they did is they went on, I think, through the swimming network, USA Swimming or something, and they hired a manager, somebody to manage the natatorium. And theirs was working so well, they were building another one. So I just wondered if it doesn't sound like we will, but it sounds like that's an option that I would love to have reserved for the authority if that's where we go, to determine if that's a way to save money. I had a few other questions. If we went with an advisory committee, is it legally possible to allow them to participate in hiring?
Not normally, not an advisory group.
Why
I mean,
not?
if you turn it over, if you create an authority, you want them to be able to hire a director who can hire and fire employees.
And I think that was what I heard from Councilor Baker, who's not here, and also from Councilor Allen, is that was an option that I think they were intrigued by, and that is that if they hired somebody to come in, Councilor Davis had referred to a number of times that he felt like one of the advantages an authority provides is being able to mitigate some of the labor costs, and thereby having an opportunity to evaluate whether or not we could operate it effectively at a lower cost. Because if it was an authority, you'd absorb, as Deputy City Manager Hodge said, some of the other departments' cost allocation, and that can be a pretty big chunk against their budget. So it'd have to, but I didn't know if we were going to give them an opportunity to weigh that and determine whether or not the revenues that could be generated and some of the expenditures that could be saved would offset that enough to where we could operate it even less expensively.
And that's the authority would have savings for personnel costs, you think?
Possibly. When we were in Mobile at the intercity visit, that's how they ran their natatorium. And they were cranking out Olympians over there, so I guess it's working for them.
Okay, good. All right, let's see here. We've got Councilor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. Does anybody know what the cost allocation charge is for the natatorium?
I don't know, but we can do them, we can look at a comparison of, say, the Civic Center, the Trade Center, and the Golf Authority, and get a pretty good idea of what cost allocation to them would be. But I don't know off the top of my head.
It's the Parks and Rec is not being charged cost
They're
allocation?
part of the general fund, and so general fund departments aren't charged cost allocation, but we do calculate cost allocation, but it would be the general fund paying back the general fund. So I'd have to look at that, and then we can provide that information.
Thank you.
So let me see if I understand, because this whole it might save us money thing, I think is something people are very interested in. When we do a budget for Parks and Rec, for instance, they have however many employees they have, and we allocate their pension cost and their health cost and what their utility bills are expected to be and all of that kind of thing. If we do an authority, then we'll be moving one function to that authority, and then we will do a calculation of what obviously their employees or health insurance and so on and so forth, and what their electrical bills are, which should be easy to determine because it's a facility. It'll be like the Trade Center, I guess.
It would be set up as an enterprise fund, so we have the Trade Center Authority, which functions as an enterprise fund, so there was repairs that had to be made for the facility or their parking area, that's absorbed within their departmental budget. We also have an enterprise fund, for example, the Civic Center operates as an enterprise fund, but it's not an authority, functions as a department head. So kind of two different examples of enterprise funds and how they operate.
Do we have any authority that is not subsidized by the city? I mean, that is self-sustaining, that pulls in the revenue that pays their overhead?
The Trade Center doesn't require a subsidy, but they do get hotel motel tax and beer tax. Civic
Like how
Center gets
much?
about 1.3 million.
Yeah, okay. So
Golf Authority